I always thought burnout would arrive with some kind of warning. A pounding headache, a blurry vision episode, maybe a stress rash. But the truth is, when your whole life is structured around pretending you're fine, the collapse comes silently, almost politely. Mine happened on a Tuesday, not even a dramatic day, just another 12-hour shift inside that fluorescent lit box of an office where deadlines had more value than people, and managers acted like compassion was a liability. I remember staring at my computer screen, trying to make sense of numbers that kept multiplying no matter how fast I typed. My eyes were burning, my hands shaking from the 4 cups of cheap vending machine coffee I'd used to replace sleep. Someone had dropped another stack of urgent files on my desk, and the weight of them, the literal physical weight, made my chest tighten. I told myself to breathe, told myself I'd rest later, told myself the same lie I'd been repeating for years. You can't afford to break down. Then the floor tilted. At least that's what it felt like. 1 second I was upright, the next I was weightless. I heard a distant thud, and only later realized it was me hitting the ground. Voices blurred into each other, someone shouting my name, someone else saying, "Call 911, and then everything slid into a cold, dark quiet. When I woke up, a bright white light punched at my eyelids. A hospital ceiling. I felt something clipped to my finger, wires attached to my chest, an oxygen tube brushing my cheek. My mouth tasted like metal. "Hey there," a soft voice said. A nurse leaned over me, her expression the kind strangers reserve for car accidents and tragedies. "You fainted at work. Paramedics brought you in. You're dehydrated, severely exhausted, and your vitals were unstable. We've been trying to reach your family." The word family snapped me fully awake. My parents, my sister, I croaked. Yes, the doctor called all of them, twice. Her tone shifted just slightly, not judgmental, but confused. No answer yet. A familiar knot tightened in my stomach, but I tried to hide the sting of disappointment. My parents were always busy, too busy to come to school plays, too busy to listen when I cried, too busy to notice when I learned to stop asking for anything at all. But still, a daughter collapsing at work. What could possibly be more important than that? The nurse checked my scribbled something on her tablet, then hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure you're aware. Your sister is active on social media. She posted a few minutes ago." I blinked. "Posted, like, online?" She nodded and held out her phone. "I wasn't going to show you, but, well, I thought you might want to see." There it was. My sister's Instagram story. A burst of neon lights, loud music, glittery outfits. She was smiling, hair curled, makeup perfect, drink in hand. A massive balloon arch behind her spelled out "best day ever." She tagged 5 friends, the club location, and the caption read, "Celebrating the most important day ever. No drama, no stress, only good vibes. No drama, no stress." And somewhere across town, her older sister was lying in a hospital bed with an infrared drip and a heart monitor. I stared at the screen, waiting to feel anger, heartbreak, anything sharp enough to cut through the numbness. But all I felt was a chilling clarity, like a fog lifting. I wasn't invisible by accident. I wasn't forgotten because they were distracted. I had been placed last on purpose. The nurse must have seen something change in my expression. She gently tucked the phone back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We'll keep trying to reach them." But I knew already. There was no point. My parents had spent my entire life convincing me that needing them was inconvenient. My sister had learned the same lesson, that love was optional, selective, and only given when it benefited her image. And now, when a hospital was calling to say their daughter had collapsed, they still chose everything else. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. This wasn't just exhaustion from work. It was exhaustion from years of being the family afterthought, the emotional backup plan, the person they remembered only when it was convenient. For the first time, lying in that cold hospital bed, I realized something painful but freeing. They didn't ignore my collapse. Ignoring me was the only thing they'd ever done consistently. Lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. They came in sharp flashes, like a slideshow I'd been forced to watch my whole life, but never allowed to comment on. Birthdays where my sister's face was plastered across every balloon, every card, every Instagram post. While I sat quietly in the corner, a present unopened, my existence barely acknowledged. School recitals where applause seemed directed at her, my own achievements shrugged off with a casual, "That's nice, honey." The golden child, the perfect one, the favorite, that had always been her. And me, I had learned early that being responsible, quiet, dependable, and invisible was safer than demanding attention. I remembered one Christmas when I was 12. My sister had asked for a shiny new bike, and my parents had spent weeks researching, comparing models, and finally wrapping it with ribbons. I had asked for a set of sketchbooks and pencils, my only real passion at the time. My parents had nodded, but the cheapest set they could find, and shoved it into a corner of the closet. "You can work with this," they said, as if my dreams were a minor inconvenience in their household. I tucked my disappointment inside and smiled anyway, practicing the art of invisibility. It was a skill I had honed for years. Even as an adult, the pattern never changed. Awards at work were quietly noted, promotions silently celebrated. My sister's milestones were announced to the world. Parties, social media posts, constant congratulations, while mine barely warranted a text message. My parents never called to ask how I was, to celebrate small victories, or even to check if I was okay. My existence had become a checklist: responsible daughter, dependable worker, silent observer. I had learned to accept it, to expect nothing. I tried calling my parents from the hospital bed, my fingers trembling round the phone. 1 ring, 2, 3, voicemail. I left a trembling message, my voice cracking. "It's me. I'm in the hospital, please." I hung up before I could finish. I knew they wouldn't come. They never did. Even the sound of my own voice pleading, filtered through the phone and into nothingness, made my chest ache in a way no for drip could fix. A nurse, watching me sit silently, gently asked, "Do you have anyone else?" Her words landed like a stone in my chest. Anyone else? It wasn't a question about family in the traditional sense. It was a question about people who actually cared. People who would show up when the world tilted and your body betrayed you. And in that moment, the weight of every ignored birthday, every dismissed achievement, every quiet heartbreak came crushing down. I realized I had no one waiting at the hospital doors. Not truly. My parents were absent. My sister, busy documenting her own life for the world to see, had made it clear whose life mattered. I was not included in that world. Tears blurred my vision, not from physical pain, but from the accumulation of every moment I'd been overlooked, every small kindness withheld, every invisible cut my family inflicted with quiet precision. It was as if I had been training for this abandonment my entire life, yet nothing could prepare me for the clarity of it now. The nurse's question lingered, "Anyone else?" And for the first time, I acknowledged the truth I had long ignored. My family had forgotten I existed. It hurt. It burned. But beneath it all, a strange clarity began to form. If they had forgotten me, maybe it was time I remembered myself. That single thought, fragile yet fierce, anchored me amid the hospital smells, the beeping machines, and the hum of fluorescent lights. I would survive this. I would survive them. The hospital finally discharged me with a polite warning about overwork and stress, as if exhaustion were a problem I could cure with a nap and a glass of water. My body still felt heavy, each step an effort, but something inside me pushed harder than my aching muscles. I decided I needed to see them, my parents, my sister, even if just to gauge whether a sliver of concern existed. Surely, after a hospital collapse, someone would pause. Surely, someone would care. I arrived at their house, the familiar driveway feeling like a stage set I had never belonged on. The sound of laughter floated through the open windows before I even rang the doorbell. When my mother opened the door, the smile on her face was bright, almost rehearsed, the kind that hides attention elsewhere. "Oh, you're home early," she said. as if I were some minor interruption rather than a daughter who had nearly collapsed in the living room. My sister's phone buzzed constantly as she celebrated some new sponsorship deal. Screenshots of congratulatory messages lighting up her grin. Balloons and confetti strewn across the room made it clear this was her moment, and I was merely an observer. I stepped forward, my voice tight but steady. "I was at the hospital yesterday," I began. "I collapsed at work. The doctors called you." You always exaggerate," my mother interrupted, cutting me off like a tape recorder on repeat. "You're dramatic about everything." Her words hit harder than I expected. The rational part of my brain wanted to protest, to list every symptom, every shaky heartbeat, every panic attack that led me to the hospital. But the words died in my throat. They had heard, and it didn't matter. My sister finally looked up, her eyes rolling almost imperceptibly. "I had an event yesterday," she said casually, scrolling through her phone as if my very existence was a minor annoyance. "I'm not ruining my day for your drama." There it was, a blunt, unvarnished truth. They didn't care. Not really. My pain was irrelevant. My near collapse, invisible. Their focus was entirely on appearances and social media clout, on celebrating my sister's life while mine barely registered in the periphery. I stood there, the room spinning not from exhaustion, but from disbelief. I remembered all those birthdays and school events ignored, all the times I had quietly set aside my own desires to avoid conflict, all the achievements I had silently celebrated alone. This pattern, repeated so meticulously over the years, finally crystallized in front of me. They didn't care. Not then, not before, and apparently, not ever. Their laughter and confetti, the phone buzzes and congratulatory texts were louder than any concern they could muster. A heavy silence settled around me. Though the noise of their celebration didn't feed, I realized with a cold clarity that showing up was pointless. The concern I had hoped to find was a mirage. I had wanted acknowledgement, a hand reaching out, a simple "Are you okay?" Instead, I was met with dismissal and indifference. It wasn't just hurtful, it was liberating in a strange, bitter way. For the first time, I could see the truth without illusions. My family's love had always been conditional, and it had nothing to do with me. I turned toward the door, not angrily, but with the weight of recognition pressing against my chest. They would not change, and I could not rely on them. That day, laughter and confetti behind me, I carried the quiet, sharp understanding that my life and my well-being were mine alone to protect. The visit I had imagined, the concern I had hoped for, it would never happen. I had barely stepped into the hallway when I caught snippets of their voices through the slightly ajar door. My parents were in the kitchen, speaking in hushed, judgmental tones, as if I weren't standing just a few feet away. "She's so emotionally needy," my mother muttered, the words dripping with contempt, always making a scene over nothing. "I don't know why we even bother." My father's sigh carried the weight of annoyance, not concern. "She'll never change," he added, and I felt the sting of those words like a slap across my chest. It wasn't that they were right. I had never asked for much, never demanded attention, never cried out except in tiny, cautious ways. Yet here I was, being defined by their lack of empathy, labeled as a burden for existing. Then came my sister's voice, sharp and cruel, cutting through the murmured complaints. "Did you see her at the hospital?" she sneered. "Fainted like some Victorian princess waiting for a carriage. Honestly, she makes everything about herself." She laughed, a high, bright sound that made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The words weren't just dismissive. They were a declaration of my invisibility. I had spent decades cultivating patience, self-restraint, and resilience. Yet this was how my family saw me: fragile, melodramatic, replaceable. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to ground myself, but my vision blurred with unchecked tears. The room round me seemed to shrink. Every cheerful decoration and congratulatory note from my sister's celebration now mocking reminders of how little I mattered. The contrast between their joy and my pain was unbearable. A physical ache in my chest. I felt smaller than I had ever felt, yet a spark ignited deep inside, the quiet, dangerous understanding that I would no longer allow myself to be reduced to their definitions, their amusement, their dismissal. Without a word, I turned and walked toward the front door, each step a quiet rebellion. I didn't pack, I didn't explain. I just left, the click of the door behind me sealing a choice I had wrestled with for years. I would not come back. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I had built a life where my existence mattered on my own terms. For the first time, I felt the weight of freedom mingled with grief, a bitter, sharp clarity that my family would never see me as anything but what they wanted me to be. I drove away without a destination, letting the city streets absorb my anger, my heartbreak, and the relentless clarity of their indifference. Every red light, every honking horn, every crowded sidewalk reminded me that the world outside my family's house was vast, chaotic, and, for the first time, mine to navigate without apology or hesitation. I thought about the hospital bed, the Instagram story, the dismissive laughter, and realized that the life I had imagined with them had always been a lie. They were incapable of seeing me, of hearing me, of caring for me. By the time I parked near a quiet cafe and wrapped my coat tighter around myself, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting another call from a colleague or maybe a reminder about work. Instead, the name flashing across the screen was unfamiliar, accompanied by a number I didn't recognize. Hesitating for a brief moment, I answered. A professional, calm voice came through, precise and deliberate. "Hello, is this my name? I'm calling regarding a family matter that requires your immediate attention. Can we schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience?" My heart skipped, a strange mix of curiosity, suspicion, and cautious hope bubbling within me. I didn't know what this could be, but the timing, just as I had finally stepped away from the people who had spent my life minimizing me, felt like more than coincidence. The road I had begun to walk alone was about to intersect with something I could never have predicted, and I felt a shiver of anticipation I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood, a quiet contrast to the chaos I had left behind at home. I sat stiffly in a chair, my hands clutching a folder that was heavier than it looked, though I didn't yet understand why. Across from me, the lawyer, a composed woman with a tone that commanded attention, shoveled papers, glanced at me briefly, and then began. "I'm here regarding your grandmother's estate. There are some documents you need to see." My heart thudded before I even understood what she meant. I had always assumed that my grandmother, kind though she was, would leave her estate equally among her children, my parents and, indirectly, my sister. That's what families did, right? Equal division, a token of fairness. I swallowed hard and nodded, trying to mask the nervous excitement blooming in my chest. She handed me a thick envelope, marked with my name in elegant, looping handwriting I recognized instantly. Grandma's. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet office. Inside were several documents, a formal letter, a private trust agreement, and stacks of financial records. I unfolded the letter first. "My dearest," it began, "I know life has not always been fair to you. I see the way favoritism and neglect have shaped your experiences, how your parents and sister have overlooked your worth. You are not the child they celebrate, but you are the one I see, truly see. This trust is my attempt to ensure you have the means to live fully, freely, and without the limitations imposed by others who do not value you as you deserve." I froze. Every memory of birthday candles ignored, every accolade uncelebrated, every moment I had quietly endured pain, now reverberated differently. My grandmother had noticed, she had known, and she had acted on it. The thought hit me like a physical wave. For decades, she had quietly worked to give me a chance to escape the toxic cycle that had defined my life. The trust documents revealed far more than I expected. There was a sum of money large enough to make financial freedom possible, several properties that had been quietly placed under my name, and a legal contingency plan ensuring my control over these assets regardless of what my parents or sister might claim. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page. And then I found the files I hadn't expected. Financial records showing that my parents had been systematically exploiting my grandmother. Money had been siphoned, accounts mismanaged, her generosity abused, evidence that they had treated her, and by extension her estate, as if it existed solely to benefit them, while disregarding her well-being. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. For the first time, I understood the true weight of family power, and how differently it could be wielded. My parents, who had dismissed me, mocked me, and ignored my collapse at work, had no idea the game had changed. The scales had shifted. I was no longer powerless, no longer invisible. My grandmother had ensured that I now held the key to leverage, to autonomy, and to justice, both for myself and for the truth she had kept safe. A strange mix of disbelief, relief, and fury swirled in me. The very people who had minimized my life, who had celebrated my sister's every success while disregarding my struggles, now faced a reality they hadn't anticipated. I held the proof, I held the assets, and I held the moral high ground. It was the first time I felt the tide turn. The first time I realized that the years of neglect and dismissal had not left me powerless. Instead, they had prepared me for this moment, for the moment I would rise and claim what was rightfully mine. The lawyer leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. This is all legally yours. You are the sole beneficiary, and no one else has any claim over these assets. The choice of how to proceed, and whether to inform your family, is entirely yours. I nodded slowly, the enormity of it sinking in. I was shaking, not from weakness, but from the recognition of the power and responsibility now resting in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt the intoxicating mix of liberation and anticipation. My parents' indifference had created a space for my grandmother's foresight to intervene. My sister's arrogance and my parents' dismissiveness had laid the groundwork for my first taste of real power. I left the lawyer's office with the documents clutched tightly against my chest, my mind buzzing with possibilities. The world felt different, sharper, heavier, more alive. The people who had spent my life ignoring me had no idea that everything had changed. For the first time, I walked with a sense of agency, a quiet, simmering certainty that the next chapter would not belong to them. The first power reversal had arrived, and I was ready. I sat alone on the edge of the lawyer's leather chair, clutching the letter like it was a lifeline. The paper felt delicate in my hands, the ink slightly faded, but deliberate. Every loop of my grandmother's handwriting carrying weight I hadn't fully understood before. My eyes skimmed the opening line again. I see you, even when they don't. My chest tightened, a mix of relief, grief, and something I couldn't name yet. For decades, I had craved recognition from my parents and sister, only to be met with indifference or ridicule. But here it was, in black and white. Someone had seen me. Someone had cared enough to ensure I wasn't left behind, emotionally or financially. As I read on, tears began to blur the edges of the page. She acknowledged my struggles, the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as if my existence was optional. She apologized for not intervening sooner, for not shielding me from the constant stream of favoritism that had followed my sister's every triumph. The words stung, but they also carried an unusual clarity, the kind that makes your bones feel steadier even as your heart aches. She didn't just see my suffering, she validated it, naming the injustice in a way that I hadn't allowed myself to. Then came the part that truly shifted something inside me, a gentle but firm exhortation to create a life of my own, far from the people who had consistently treated me as an afterthought. You are capable of building a life of dignity, love, and autonomy, she wrote. Do not let the shadows of those who never valued you shape your future. Claim the life that is yours, without apology, without hesitation. I closed my eyes and let the weight of her words sink in. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life without the constant need for approval from my parents or the suffocating glare of my sister's jealousy. For the first time, I felt the fragile seed of hope take root. And yet, this clarity was not born from relief alone. It was fueled by righteous anger and the slow, burning recognition that I had been surviving on scraps of attention, pretending they were enough. They had never been enough. I curled the letter against my chest, letting the tears flow freely, not from despair, but from recognition. My grandmother had seen what I could not, that my worth was independent of their approval, that I had been preparing for this moment, for liberation, for agency, for the chance to claim the life I deserved. In that quiet office, I finally let myself feel the full spectrum of my emotions: grief for the love I never received, sorrow for the years wasted on expectations I could not meet, and, most powerfully, clarity. I didn't need my family. I didn't need their validation. I needed a plan. The lawyer cleared her throat softly, drawing my attention back to the present. "There's one thing you should understand," she said carefully, leaning in. "Your family has no idea about this inheritance yet. Not a word. Legally, everything is yours. But you have time to decide how, or if they find out." A jolt of anticipation coursed through me. The timing, the secrecy, the control, it was intoxicating. My mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and a simmering sense of justice. For years, I had felt powerless, invisible, and forgotten. Now, I had the chance to tip the scales, to step out of their shadow, and to finally determine the terms of my life. I took a slow, steadying breath, letting the paper rest on my lap. My grandmother's voice lingered in my mind, quiet but firm. "Claim the life that is yours." I realized I had been waiting for someone to rescue me, to care for me, to acknowledge me. But that rescue would never come from them. It would come from me. And in that realization, the first sparks of empowerment began to burn. The question, sharp and urgent, settled in my mind. When I acted, what would I do first? The first call came the evening, just as I was leaving the lawyer's office with the documents tucked carefully into my bag. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated for a moment, heart hammering with curiosity, before answering. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Sweetheart, we just wanted to check in," my mother began, her tone overly casual, like the words had been practiced in a mirror. But something in the rhythm of her voice felt off, calculated. The next call came 15 minutes later. My father, pretending concern, asked about my health, my rest, my recovery. My chest tightened, but I noticed the same pattern. Vague, perfunctory questions, no real urgency, no emotional connection. By the end of the night, my phone was buzzing incessantly. 10 calls in 30 minutes, 15 calls in an hour. I finally answered another, only to hear my sister's voice, bright and urgent, demanding my help. She had some new sponsorship brand launching, a small empire she was building on social media, and apparently I was essential to making it happen. Editing videos, drafting captions, handling logistics, all unpaid, all family duty, she said with an airy laugh. My parents chimed in through the speaker, attempting to frame it as concern. "Family shows up for each other, honey," my father said, as if guilt could be dressed as virtue. "It's what we do. You know you can help, right?" My mother echoed it. "We're all counting on you. You're the responsible one." I paused, the phone clutched tightly in my hand. Their voices, the same ones that had ignored me when I collapsed, laughed at my pain, dismissed my existence, were now coiled around expectation. Suddenly, everything was crystal clear. They didn't care about me. They never had. I existed only when I was useful, only when my labor, my time, or my patience could serve their purposes. My collapse at work, my hospital stay, my fear, all irrelevant. Only utility mattered. I felt a strange calm descend over me, colder than any hospital room I had ever been in. This was not betrayal, not entirely. It was clarity. I could see the pattern, the truth of my family's behavior, in stark relief. My parents' calls were not love, not concern, not any form of genuine care. They were demands cloaked in guilt, their sense of morality weaponized to extract what they wanted. And my sister's cheerful voice, so used to being at the center of everything, had learned the same lesson. I existed for her, too, only in so far as I could elevate her life. I took a slow breath, studying my mind. "No," I said finally, my voice low but unwavering. "I won't do it. I'm not helping. Not now. Not ever." A silence fell on the line so sudden I could hear my own heartbeat. Then came the sound of disbelief, sharp and almost audible through the speakers. My mother sputtered, "But we're your family. You can't just..." My father's voice rose slightly, as if volume could coerce compliance. "You're being unreasonable. This is family." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply let the words wash over me, letting them collide with the still clarity forming inside my chest. They had never understood me. They had never protected me. They had never valued me. And now, after decades of dismissals, neglect, and calculated indifference, I could see them for exactly what they were. Opportunists who only remembered me when it served them. The line went dead, and my phone buzzed again almost immediately. Another call, another demand. But I felt no fear. I felt no hesitation. For the first time, I understood that the storm that was coming would not be their making, but mine, a storm I could control, one step at a time. And in that quiet moment, staring at the phone, I realized that refusing to comply was not just defiance. It was the first act of liberation. They had underestimated me my whole life, and for the first time, I held the upper hand. I let the phone rest, a silent declaration of intent. I would no longer be useful. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be ignored. On my terms, on my timeline, the storm was coming, and they had no idea. I hadn't expected them to show up. I had locked the door, secured the deadbolt, and hoped the day would pass quietly. But the knock came before noon, sharp and insistent. My heart sank, but I didn't falter. When I opened the door, there they were, my parents, looking righteous and slightly irritated. My sister trailing behind with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Open up," my mother said, her voice a mix of insistence and fox concern. "We need your help. The launch is today, and you're the only one who can manage the edits and paperwork." Her tone carried the expectation of obedience, the kind I had carried with me for decades. And yet this time, I felt none of the usual fear. "I can't," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "I'm not helping." My father's face twisted in disbelief. "What do you mean, you're not helping? Everything you have is because of us," he shouted, his voice sharp, full of accusation. "We raised you. We supported you. You can't just refuse." I took a deep breath, the words I had rehearsed finally forming in my mind. The silence that followed felt heavy, anticipatory. "Actually," I said slowly, letting each word land, "I have something that's mine now. Something Grandma left me." The shift was immediate. My parents froze, the familiar airs of authority and superiority cracking for the first time I could remember. My father's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if the words he wanted to say had abandoned him. My mother's hands trembled slightly at her sides, and my sister, oh, my sister, her smug smirk dissolved into something darker. Jealousy, shock, and confusion mingled in her expression, making her almost unrecognizable. "What do you mean?" my mother demanded, her voice tight with suspicion. "What are you talking about?" I said it. I replied evenly, my hands clasped in front of me. "Grandma left me something, a trust, an inheritance, everything I need to live my life without depending on anyone here. And no, I'm not telling you the details." My sister stepped forward, her voice rising, sharp and demanding. "You can't just keep that from us. You owe us. You can't." I raised a hand, stopping her mid-rant, my calm a stark contrast to the storm brewing in the apartment. "I owe you nothing," I said firmly. "For decades, I was invisible. For decades, you dismissed me, mocked me, ignored me. You celebrated her, laughed at me, and left me to fend for myself. Nothing I have, nothing I am, comes from you. But now, I have something that truly belongs to me, and that changes everything." My father's jaw tightened, his face red with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is ridiculous. How dare you? How dare I?" I echoed, my voice rising just enough to carry authority. "How dare I finally exist for myself, for my own life, on my own terms? How dare I stop being a tool for your convenience? Grandma saw everything, the favoritism, the neglect, and she made sure I would have a chance to live outside your control. That's not just my right, it's my responsibility." The room fell into tense silence, but my sister's face contorted into fury. Her voice cracked like a whip as she finally screamed, "You owe us." I felt the weight of her accusation, the entitlement dripping from every word. But instead of panic, a strange clarity settled over me. I didn't owe them. Not my time, not my energy, not my compliance. I had spent too long living for a family that only remembered me when it served them. Now, the power had shifted. I looked at each of them in turn, calm and unwavering. "No," I said softly, but with an iron edge beneath it. "I owe you nothing." And in that instant, I knew the storm that had been building in my chest was about to break. And for the first time, I would be the one directing it. I placed the folder on the kitchen counter, my hands steady despite the adrenaline buzzing through my veins. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as my parents and sister gathered around, expecting control, expecting manipulation. But this time, I held the cards, literal and figurative. I opened the folder, letting the paper slide out, and the weight of the evidence seemed to fill the room. "These are the records," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Everything. The accounts, the transfers, the statements showing how you pressured Grandma for money, drained her savings, and manipulated her into giving you more than she ever intended. All the emails, the notes, the documents proving how you treated her, emotionally and financially, are here." My parents glanced at each other nervously, their eyes darting to my sister, who now wore an expression of disbelief that quickly twisted into defensiveness. "This is absurd," my father barked, his face reddening. "You're reading things wrong. You're overreacting. Your grandmother never said." "She didn't need to say it," I interrupted, flipping to a marked page and pointing to the figures showing transfers and demands over the past decade. "The numbers speak for themselves. Every withdrawal, every pressure, every guilt-laden call you made, this is what you did to her. This is what you've been hiding." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, the silence heavy as she shuffled papers nervously. My father opened his mouth again, but no words came out. My sister, however, couldn't contain herself. "You're just trying to turn Grandma against us," she shouted, her voice rising, cracking with desperation. "You're twisting everything. You're lying. I held up a hand, not angrily, not with malice, but with a clarity that cut through the chaos. "No," I said slowly, letting each word sink in. "No, you did that yourselves." The room fell into stunned silence. The accusation wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It hung in the air, undeniable, like smoke curling round their inability to respond. My parents' faces betrayed the cracks I had long known were there, their habitual defensiveness failing them for the first time in my life. The excuses, the rehearsed lines, the careful manipulation, all crumbled under the weight of the truth. "You can't be serious," my mother whispered, voice trembling as she glanced at the documents again, disbelief and shame mixing in her expression. I said. "I've read every note, every account statement, every email. You took advantage of Grandma's trust and generosity. You drained her financially, manipulated her emotionally, and you treated her like she existed only to serve you. And you did it for years. That's the truth. Not me, not anyone else. You." My sister's hands trembled as she waved at the folder, her face red with fury and panic. "You don't understand. You're exaggerating. You're ruining everything. Grandma would never, she would never what?" I asked, my voice steady, slicing through her rant. "She would never approve of being treated like a bank for her own children. She would never have wanted her kindness abused. She would never have allowed her legacy to be stolen from her while pretending everything was fine." The words hung like a weight over them, undeniable and unyielding. I felt a strange sense of relief, a cathartic release. As the room's energy shifted, they could no longer gaslight me. They could no longer pretend ignorance. The power dynamic had flipped completely. For decades, they had controlled the narrative. For decades, I had been the silent observer, the invisible child. Now, the truth was mine, the evidence in my hands, and the authority finally resting squarely with me. My parents' lips parted in muttered protests. My sister's eyes filled with anger and helplessness. But I didn't flinch. This was the dismantling moment I had been preparing for, not with rage, but with unwavering clarity. They had created this storm themselves. They had sown it with their neglect, greed, and cruelty. And now, finally, it had returned to them, undeniable and irreversible. I took a slow breath, letting the silence settle. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The next morning, my phone buzzed endlessly, a chaotic symphony of notifications I hadn't expected. My sister had launched a full-blown attack online, spinning her narrative like a web designed to trap anyone who would listen. I can't believe she stole from our family. One story read, another post, dripping with melodrama, implied that I had manipulated Grandma, that I had somehow schemed to claim what was never meant for me. Each post was polished, calculated, crafted to provoke outrage and sympathy for her. At first, I hesitated. My instincts screamed at me to stay quiet, to avoid feeding the fire. But I knew silence would be interpreted as guilt. They were trying to paint me as the villain, and the world was watching. I took a deep breath, remembering Grandma's words, "Claim the life that is yours," and I realized it wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming my narrative, controlling the story that had always been written by others. I opened my laptop and began carefully selecting screenshots and documents from the folder I had received at the lawyer's office. I wasn't going to post everything. No, that would be reckless. I only needed to release enough to tell the truth, enough to reveal the hypocrisy, the emotional neglect, and the financial exploitation my parents had committed against Grandma. I highlighted emails where my parents pressured her for money, screenshots where my sister dismissed me entirely, and letters from Grandma acknowledging my pain and rewarding my perseverance. As I uploaded the posts, I felt a strange mixture of dread and liberation. I knew the world would see the evidence, and I knew the narrative would shift. Within hours, notifications began flooding in. Messages from friends, distant relatives, even strangers commenting with empathy and shock. "I can't believe they treated you like that." One comment read, "You deserve this inheritance," said another. The balance of public opinion, long skewed in their favor, had swung decisively. The first shockwave hit my sister almost immediately. Brands that had sponsored her posts began pulling out, setting reputational risk. The influencers who had once collaborated with her distanced themselves quietly but unmistakably. Her carefully curated world, built on perceived innocence and charm, began to crumble as the truth emerged. She was furious, her posts growing more desperate and increasingly transparent. But the damage was done. The tide of sympathy had already turned on my parents, too, felt the shift acutely. Friends who had admired their influence, neighbors who had long accepted their curated image of moral authority, now hesitated. Whispers spread, subtle at first, then more insistent. They could no longer maintain the facade of benevolence they had cultivated for decades. The very community that had allowed their indifference to slide unchecked was now questioning them, judging them, and watching them struggle under the weight of their own hypocrisy. I sat back in my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. I wasn't vindictive in my posts. I wasn't gloating. I was presenting the truth, plain and unvarnished, allowing others to witness the reality that had been my daily life for years. It was a measured, controlled reversal of power, and it felt intoxicating. For the first time, I had agency not only over my life, but over the story itself. By evening, the ripple effects were undeniable. My sister's sponsorships collapsed completely, her follower engagement plummeting, and brands publicly announced they were severing ties. My parents received calls, messages, and judgmental glances from their social circle, questioning their treatment of both grandma and me. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a public reckoning, one they hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. I felt a quiet, steady satisfaction. The storm had arrived, yes, but it was precise, intentional, and utterly just. I had not only reclaimed my life and inheritance, but also ensured that their actions could no longer go unchecked, that their emotional cruelty and opportunism had consequences that extended beyond our private conflicts. Sitting back, watching the notifications roll in, I realized that this was more than revenge. It was a restoration of balance, a reclamation of agency, and a demonstration that the truth, when wielded with clarity and courage, was more powerful than any lie, any manipulation, or any privilege my family had wielded for years. For the first time, I felt untouchable. It wasn't long before the doorbell rang again. I had been anticipating it, though I had tried to convince myself otherwise. When I opened the door, my parents and sister were there. This time, their faces wet with tears, expressions softened, voices trembling with urgency. They looked small, almost human in a way I hadn't seen in years. The arrogance, the entitlement, the indifference, it had all been replaced by desperation. "Please," my mother began, her voice cracking. "We didn't mean for any of this to happen. You can't ruin the family name. We're your parents, and we need you to understand." My father's voice chimed in, equally pleading. "We just want you to share. It's your inheritance, yes, but we're still family. You can't. You shouldn't." I took a step back, letting the door close slightly behind me, giving myself space to absorb their sudden vulnerability. I studied them carefully. The tears weren't convincing. The words were rehearsed. Their panic was raw, but it wasn't remorse. It wasn't care. It was fear, fear of exposure, fear of losing control, fear of their carefully constructed world collapsing under the truth. I felt the years of neglect, mockery, and invisibility press against my chest, the exhaustion of being dismissed, ignored, and overlooked. All these decades surged forward, mingling with the cold, crystalline clarity I had gained over the past weeks. I was no longer the child who waited for their calls, who bent under their expectations, who silently endured their favoritism and ridicule. I was someone who had power now, tangible, undeniable power, and I wouldn't give it up for their fear. "When I needed you in the hospital," I said slowly, letting each word land like a hammer, "you posted a selfie." The silence that followed was staggering. My parents' tears faltered, and their mouths opened as if to speak, only to close again. My sister's face twisted, caught between fury and guilt, but she couldn't form the words. They had no script for this moment. The truth was simple, unyielding, and final. I had just reminded them, not with anger, but with clarity, of every time they had failed me when it mattered most. I continued, my voice steady, resonant with the weight of years spent in their shadow. "Do you know what that feels like? To collapse, to be ignored, to reach out for the people who are supposed to protect you, and have them choose a camera and a social media post over your life?" My chest tightened, but I held my ground. "You didn't care then. You only care now because of fear, because the world is watching. But it's too late for apologies. I don't need your validation. I don't need your approval. I need my life, and I'm finally living it on my terms." My sister opened her mouth again, her voice sharp with desperation. "We're still family. You can't just..." I shook my head, cutting her off gently but firmly. "No, you can't demand anything from me. Family doesn't act like this. Family doesn't ignore someone when they're in need and then expect obedience when it suits them. You broke that bond years ago. I'm done waiting. I'm done explaining. I'm done existing for you." Their faces fell, and the reality of my refusal hung in the air like a physical presence. No tears, no pleas, no accusations could penetrate the calm, unshakable certainty I had found. They were powerless, finally, against the clarity I had forged through heartbreak, betrayal, and the quiet but undeniable inheritance of my grandmother's foresight. I closed the door slowly, letting the click resonate like the final punctuation on a sentence I had spent years writing with my life. They were left on the other side, their voices muted, their presence irrelevant, and for the first time, I felt entirely, completely untouchable. The past was theirs. The future was mine. The silence after the door clicked shut was profound, almost sacred. I leaned against it for a moment, letting the weight of everything sink in. Years of neglect, indifference, and subtle cruelty had built up like layers of dust in my chest, and now, with a single act of refusal, I felt them fall away. I was finally free. Free to choose, free to act, free to live without the constant drain of a family that had never truly seen me. I made my decision immediately. There would be no financial support, no favors, no appeasement. The inheritance my grandmother had carefully entrusted to me was mine to use as I saw fit, and I would honor her foresight by building a life she had envisioned, independent, unshackled, and authentic. I would no longer exist to prop up the illusions, ambitions, or entitlement of people who had never valued me. Packing my essentials into boxes felt like a ritual of release. Each item I carefully folded or wrapped represented a piece of my past life, a past I was leaving behind. The apartment I had once shared with quiet despair would no longer be my cage. I had keys now, real keys, to a home that was mine in every sense, gifted by the woman who had loved me enough to protect me, even when my own family would not. As I drove to the property, the streets seemed different, brighter, lighter. The city noise faded into background hums, and I felt a rare sense of peace, almost as if the chaos of my past life could no longer reach me. The property itself was beautiful, modest but elegant, a reflection of careful planning and understated wealth. It smelled faintly of polished wood and history, a tangible reminder of the women who had seen me, who had acted when others wouldn't. The first night in my new home, I walked through the room slowly, feeling the quiet strength of permanence in the walls around me. I set down the folder from the lawyer, the last physical link to my former life, and allowed myself a moment of reflection. Tears came, unbidden, but they weren't the helpless tears of a child seeking validation. They were cleansing tears, gratitude, relief, and triumph all mingled together. I was untethered from their expectations, and it felt intoxicating. Finally, I took a symbolic step. I opened my phone, scrolled through the social media accounts and messages that had tied me to them for so long, and one by one, I blocked their numbers, deleted screenshots, and erased reminders of their manipulations. Each tap was deliberate, each deletion a punctuation on the chapter of my life I was closing. I felt the tension in my chest unwind, the years of suppression melting away. Sitting on the balcony that overlooked a quiet street, I breathed deeply, the cool night air filling me with clarity. No more calls, no more guilt, no more emotional labor demanded in the name of blood or obligation. The people who had ignored me, mocked me, and exploited my patience were now outside my reach. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I finally belonged to myself.